All right, we're gonna go through some ideas in chinuch and raising kids. There are a lot of really good books out, really good books. This is Rav Shlomo Wolbe. Wolbe was a great sage in Israel. I married to meet him, and he was a great sage, and he was an expert in this area. One book. There's some good secular books too. There's one. Have you ever heard of Chaim Ginot? And Ginot is really good. He's got a good approach on how, like, specifics of certain kid things that really fall into the way the Torah is talked about, and so we'll bring some things from him. I recommend some books also. Yeah, his book that his students wrote too. So, but I want to start with a statement of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter on kids. I think this is important to sort of get them. I mean, I forget it, and it's very easy to forget. If somebody lost, had a boat, let's say, $50,000 boat, and your boat got sunk, you'd be upset, right? You'd be upset. You'd be freaked out and distraught, and rightfully so. You lost a $50,000 boat. So he says, what Salanter says, he says, when a kid is playing in the bathtub, and he has a piece of wood, okay? And that piece of wood in his mind is a boat. When you take that piece of wood away, you just sunk his boat. He said he has the same feelings of losing the boat as you do when you lost your real boat. And that's a freaky way to think about it. Because, and I know it sounds a little bit extreme, but the reason why it's important is because it's so easy for us to forget that, kids are people too, as the old song. We forget that because we say, come on, it's not really a boat, it's a piece of wood. But we have to realize that in their world, these things give them that same emotion. So although we're going to talk about how we direct our kids and how we discipline our kids and get our kids to do what's right, I think the first thing that is maybe the hardest thing for us to sort of realize is that in their world, the things that matter to them are appropriate to their level, and they're just as real as the things that we value. So that's really crucial because you can't, your kids are all young now, but they get older. You can insult them in front of other people. You could yell at them in front of other people. You could tell them what to do, and it becomes a major problem because we're desensitized to the fact that the kids are human beings that have all the sensitivities and halachas regarding any person that we have to be sensitive towards. So that's the first. I think it's a very important just way to start understanding how we have to relate to the kids as full human beings who have the same sensitivities, but in an appropriate level to where they're at. Right? Now, what does the word chinuch mean? Chinuch. What does it mean? Anyone know what the word chinuch means? Does anybody? What? Training. So is that exactly what it means or not? So there are some explanations that take the training approach, but the way they learn the word chinuch then is hergel, is habituating. Now, some people understand the word chinuch banim means that you're training them in the sense that you're habituating them to certain things. Now that's really an important thing to do because there are things that people do because you get used to doing, and a habit is second nature. If you're trained to go into do something, the kid wakes up, they wash their hands in the morning, they do that. The kid is trained to we have to see how to train because training is a word that's probably more appropriate for dogs than for kids. And for what I just said originally, we got to be careful. We're not training them like we'll train a dog. But hergel, to habituate them to certain actions, is one explanation of the word chinuch. And so you got to understand that and I know this for myself in terms of certain things with my own kids. There are certain things I probably could have done better at, just like saying, okay, consistency. This is what we're doing. This is where it doesn't, I'm not talking about discipline. I'm just talking about consistency in this is what you do. So hergel, a consistency in what we're doing is very, very important for the kid. Because what happens is that Rav Dessler says in life that a person is judged where they take their free will decisions from after their training. So if you are trained in a certain way, that's where you're starting life at. So you want your kid to be able to be starting with certain habits, certain good habits that are ingrained in a constant way. So chinuch's going to start from a young age. It's going to start from a very young age in terms of getting them habituated to certain things. That's one explanation of chinuch. But there's another explanation of chinuch, which is more has to do with, we see like the chinuch, the inauguration. Chinuch habayit, chanukat habayit. When you inaugurate the temple, you inaugurate a house. So inaugurating means that you're starting something. It's a beginning point. Okay, and now that's very important in terms of how we start kids, and this is Rav Shlomo Wolbe's approach here in terms of how he talks about it. That there's two different parts to the training of the kids. One he calls growth, and one is called building. And they're very, very different. Meaning, with growth, there are certain things you want to be able to implant in the kid, like a seed, and let them develop on their own. It's not, and this is all conceptual in the first session, but you don't want to go always and you don't want to create a robot with your kid. So there is a certain degree of things that you're planting the seed in the kid that will start to develop. Okay? It's not you coming along and saying, do this, do that. There's a certain place where the kid is certain things are values are being implanted in them at certain times. Okay? Let's talk about the first thing you have to teach your kid. So the Talmud says that once the kid could start to speak, the parent teaches them Torah and the Shema. Tries to speak Hebrew words to them. Okay? What's the Torah you teach the kid? So you teach Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. That's the first thing you have to teach a kid. Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's the first thing you have to teach a kid. And it talks about it very seriously. A person doesn't. Because what happens is that's planting a seed in the kid. The kid could speak. The kid should hear the things that they might not fully understand right now, but this is Shema. The story I told yesterday in shul. It's the one thing that the lady remembered when she walked into the Kalbach shul. She remembered the Shema. So if you're going to teach your kids, you got to plant in them certain things that are values that are important to you that are going to come out in the future. So really, when the kid starts to speak, they don't really understand so much and this and that. Yeah, well, they gotta learn. No, the first thing you want to teach them is Shema and Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, and they're hearing you speaking this Hebrew language. And now, the way they talk about it is to speak, Lashon Kodesh, holy language of the kid. Now, we might not be experts in holy language, but we know Shema, we know Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, we might know some other things. But now the kid is hearing this idea. So the kid in his head, okay, so there's Torah. What's Torah? There's Moshe. Who is Moshe? So that's planting in the kids certain things that are going to develop. And this is what I'm going to tell you now. I think is a classic mistake that all young parents do, even older parents do. You got to play for the long game. You don't, and we'll see that when we talk about discipline a little bit in a few minutes. But you don't need to win every battle right now. You have to even try to avoid battles. We're going to see. But the idea is that if you have the kid is going to have certain seeds planted in them, they're going to grow. If you plant the seed well, then they grow over time. And you don't have to see right now, there are parents who are extremely controlling and like, I gotta get this way. No, let the kid grow. There's a certain thing. If you plant the seed, okay, and you plant certain seeds of values in the kid, then over the years in the proper environment, which we'll speak about in a minute, of the home, that's gonna grow. That's gonna grow. And so that's planting. That's letting the thing grow itself. There's certain things you gotta build, okay? There's certain times. Now this is very, very crucial because you gotta get the right timing with certain things. And that's why it's important now. It's good that we're having this class early because, a person, comes, starts Chinuch Banim at 12, you got a problem already. You started at 7, you got a problem already. You want to, the halacha is that we train the kids for every mitzvah when they can do that mitzvah. When do you buy a kid a lulav and esrog? When they're able to shake the lulav and esrog. You don't buy it for them earlier, and you don't buy it for them later. You get them lulav and esrog when they have the wherewithal, the ability to shake the lulav in a basic way. Why? Because now that's age appropriate. And this is something I'm honestly a little frustrated now with that I'm going through with my own, one of my own kids right now, and maybe we'll change this and maybe we'll build our own school. But one frustration I have right now is that the Talmud tells us when you're supposed to teach kids certain things. And the Talmud says Talmud is at 15, or 14. There's no schools in America that do that. There's only a few in Israel that do that. It's a few that do that. And I had a problem right now with Yaakov. Yaakov, because they don't teach the kids the way they're supposed to, according to what the Gemara does. There's one school in Israel that did. I sent my kids to that school. That school, when the kid was 5 or 6, depending on the Talmud says the different ages of the kids' abilities, they started memorizing. They started singing. They started singing the Torah, not shoving down the kids' throats and sit for 12 hours. That's not what I did. These kids were singing, Breshis, Bara, Elokim, and they loved it. And their minds are sponges. They memorize everything at that point. You can't memorize anything at this point. When you get older, you can't remember things. When you're a kid, you memorize everything. So they had the kid, the Talmud says at 5, or if the kid is not as fast at 6, or possibly even 7 if it's in slower development, which is okay. Kids have to develop on their own time. So what happens is that they're supposed to learn then really memorization. They get the stories of the Torah, they get the words, and they sing it. Then at 10, the Talmud says you start teaching them Mishnah, because they can now have a little bit more of understanding of sort of logic. And only when they're 14 or 15, you start learning Gemara with them, Talmud. But my kid's going to school now. They don't do the memorizing so much. So now he's 11, and they learn Gemara. So I learned Gemara with him a couple weeks ago, and I was learning with him a certain part. And it was a really hard Gemara. And it was too hard for his age. And we learned it, and now he doesn't want to learn with me. I see he's pushing it off. He's like, oh, I'm busy, how we do this, we do that. He's pushing off doing that right now. And the reason why he's pushing it off now is because he got pushed to do something really that's it's not age appropriate. So, toilet training your kids, there's no prize to be the first one to do it. You don't got to do that. You don't got to be the first one. There's no. So all of these things that we end up pushing on the kids is a mistake. You got to let it develop in the right time. So to make it too fast is not good, because what happens is the kid feels frustrated. They feel that, wow, I can't do this. And that's really, really negative. Then it means the kid's it's so negative. And the kid feels that I'm supposed to be doing something now and I can't do it. That's one of the worst things, because they feel like a failure. And they don't want to do it, and then they avoid it. And you see it. I haven't learned with him now in a week, and I'm kind of waiting to get back in. I'm going to try to get into an easier discussion of it. But he doesn't even realize he's making excuses not to do it right now because he faced something that was a hard Gemara, and it was not something that was age appropriate. And the systems very often will tell us to do things when we're not ready to do it. So to start the kid too early on something, or starting too late on something, those things are really, really not good. You got to time it. You got to time it to build the kid, to build him to certain expectations and certain things that you expect from him in the right time. Okay, you know, how old is Sharon now?
Just over 2.
Oh, 2. You know, when terrible twos hit, you know, we're going to see it's not really time for big discipline. It's really not.
Wait, they haven't happened yet?
Okay, they happen. Right? Some kids, they happen at 6 months, you know. And some kids, I mean, I have one kid that it didn't start until like, terrible twos till like 3.5. And they went a lot longer than afterwards. because some kids develop in very, very different ways, which we're going to see in a second. You got to really, you know, we all have, you know, many children. You can't make one size fits all education, because kids develop in different speeds and different times. So you got to look when you're a kid. And that's why the ages of all the mitzvahs in Chazal are very, very like they're sort of, they don't give you an exact age. They say you teach a kid, you know, 5, 6, or 7, and you start teaching them some Torah. You start to speak, because it really depends on when the kid develops certain skills, and certain kids develop it at different stages. That's okay. So we have to try to go and to plan certain things we're going to see. We want to get the feeling for it. We want to implant the value for it, but we don't want to micromanage the kid. We have to see that. That's a what do they call it? The hovering parent? I don't know what they call it.
Helicopter.
Yeah. So that's a disaster. That's a disaster. You know, and it's a very, very common thing. So we don't want to do that. We want to plant certain seeds and trust the kid. That's what it means we want to build. We want to tell them, okay, this is what we're doing now. We're doing this. But it's got to be at the age-appropriate time that you have to determine. You look in the Torah what the categories are. When you can shake the lulav, then you get a lulav. When they can speak, you start talking to them Lashon HaKodesh. But you know, the famous custom of cutting the kid's hair after they're 3, right? It's based in a very deep tradition. I'm not saying you have to do that. You know, it's a custom. You know. But people, so there are people who only cut the boys' hair when they have to. Why? What's the rationale? The rationale is very simple, because they learn that from the law of Orla. Orla, 3 years you can't eat it. Okay, in the 4th year you could eat it, and you bring it to Jerusalem, and they would eat the fruit in the 4th year. So the Ramban Nachmanides says the first 3 years it has some kind of bitterness and unhealthy, spiritually and physically, aspects of the fruit. If you try to eat it then, it's not going to be good for you. If you try at that point to push the kid to, I think you should sit through the entire meal. The kid sit through the entire meal. You know, you push the kid to do certain things in those few years when they just need the warm, loving environment, and we're trying to discipline them in a certain way that they're not able to get. It's not just fruitless, it's actually negative. So we don't cut the kids' hair. We say, listen, in the beginning, you know, there's limited training as far as you could do. It's limited, it's extremely limited. You can't go and expect so much from a kid. You got to give them, what we'll talk about in a moment, the loving environment that is going to nurture things. But you can't really go and now and expect that in the you know, and you see these parents like, you know, the kid is 2 years old and I expect this, and I'm not. You see, it's bizarre. It's really bizarre. But I think our society feeds into this. You know, my kid's going to be Einstein because, you know, by 2 years old, I've already, you know, we read War and Peace last week. Right, so that's the introduction. So thoughts, comments on what we said so far. Kind of makes sense, sort of makes sense. What are your thoughts, emotions, feelings about the direction
You're
we're
not
going?
saying that you shouldn't discipline at all until
No.
after 3.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it's got to be very, very,
Breakdown.
yeah.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, is that there's age appropriate and you start with the mitzvahs at a certain point and all of that. But I guess considering where we're at, what do you do until that point?
Yeah, so we're gonna go through it, and we'll give very specific things of how we're talking about. But this is an introduction because it's a different expectation. You know, if you can't have your kid doing certain things that are, you know, you can't let your kid say, well, he's gonna play with fire and I'm gonna let him experience this. I mean, obviously that's absurd. There's certain things but we gotta talk about how you do that. I mean, we talk about yelling and hitting and these things. We'll talk about that in a moment. But there are certain things and there's certain ways we'll talk about very specifically how to get them to be safe and not harm themselves and others and damage things But that's not that's basic, you know, direction. That's not thinking that now I have to train the kid in this and that. And that's a mistake that people very often feel for younger kids. They think that they have to, you know, teach them. They have to really, you know, and we're going to see in a second that you know it has negative consequences, and I have to be very, very careful how to do it. Of course, you got to direct your kid. We're talking about directing. This whole class is directing our kid, you know. But it needs to be done with, you know. The Talmud says there are three things in the world that you have to have. The right hand bring close, and the left hand says no, and one of them is kids. For kids, you have to generally you got to not take the tough approach, and we'll talk about it in a moment. It's negative, and certain things that I see that I thought were very smart at the time, I see now are not smart. You can't always see it at that point because you think I want to accomplish something right now. It's not necessarily the way to go.
You have to give them boundaries.
Boundaries for sure.
I mean, there's something about, like, obviously, like, punishing a child, and that doesn't need to happen, but if they're doing something dangerous, then, you know, if you go, no, sweetie, that's dangerous, you haven't made a point of it.
100%. Not only that, not only that, I don't think that...
I don't think you should smack your kid.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Of course, I'm not even talking about that. I'm not talking about, in other words, when people get into these long discussions with their kids about stuff that I'm not talking about that either.
Well, you don't need a dissertation after.
Yeah, I'm saying.
Well, there's a difference between like we're doing something together and shaming a kid. I mean, you know, like it's always if we want them to do something else because what they're doing is dangerous. You say it's dangerous and let's go do this, and you say let's, and you find something else that's going to channel that energy. I mean, not that that always works.
Right, it doesn't always work, but 100%. I'm not. Of course, you give the kid boundaries. Of course. Right now, I'm just talking about there's an overreaching that people have of little kids. As I said, anything that's dangerous, anything that you can't handle. You know, the kid is, you know, doing certain things. But look, I'll give you an example. If the kid is yelling and screaming, okay. So there's two ways to be looking at this. One way is, okay, they're throwing a temper tantrum. What do I got to do? One way to say it is, well, I got to find a way to deal with this right now. I'm in the grocery store, I'm in the supermarket, this is bad, it's a problem. How am I going to get past this situation right now, okay? Is the kid have a timeout? Is the kid, if it's in the house, he could yell and scream there? That's one way to say, how do I deal with the situation? Another way to say, no, this kid has to learn once and for all, you know, that, you know, you can't go and you know, have this temper tantrum. Now, I agree, there's a certain point where you're going to have to teach your kid that. But if the kid if we keep trying to, like, you know, at an early age say, now is the time where I'm going to straighten them out, that backfires. It doesn't really, I believe it's a mistake. I believe it's a mistake. You know, and I mean, we've tried a lot of different systems over the years. Some I thought, you know, worked good, but reality is that doesn't always. It's not always. You don't always want to. When you think that you're winning, it depends on what price you're paying. So it's sometimes wise to let the kid, okay, this is timeout, this is not how we act. If you want to scream, you could scream in this room. Okay. But you're giving the kid boundaries. You're not letting the kid go screaming all over the house. But you're creating them an idea where you don't think at 2 years old that this is my point of education, where the kid's going to learn his lesson once and for all that you don't scream. You're going to build that. You're going to say, listen, this is not an appropriate way to be. If you're going to do this, you could do this over here. That's fine. That's fine. You've directed, you've controlled the situation, but you've planted the seeds that the kid is going to understand that that's not acceptable behavior, but not that you won the battle and you shut him up. Because shutting him up then, if you do it, if you need to bring out the big cannons, it can very often have negative effects. And we'll talk about that right now. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, ideas? Yeah.
I think the child naturally, instinctually wants to please their parent. And sometimes it's not as much what we say, but how we say it. And facial expression goes a long way. So I think that a lot of smiling and positive, looking at the child, and a smile goes so far you can't even imagine. And when we say things with a smile, our voice changes when we're smiling. And if we're upset with our child, and we just have to sometimes look at them in a certain way, they know that you're upset with them. That says more than the words that come out of your mouth a lot of times. Really, I think it's a big thing that the child instinctually wants to please the parent. And when they see your pleasure or displeasure in their actions, sometimes that goes much farther than we would even realize.
Right.
Yeah.
So, very good point. I want to ask you a question. What do you think is the most important way that you teach your kids?
By modeling.
Modeling. This is really, this is the most important aspect. And it really just can't be overstated, because it really is, it's the mistake, and it really is the solution at the same time. It's so clear. It is nothing to do with what you're saying, it's what you're doing. There's a story I shared with you. This guy went to there was these two guys in shul, okay, 2 guys in shul, and they had their kids with them in Israel. Their kids with them in shul, and one guy was one of these guys. He was davening all the time, and his kid was like running around and this and that. His kid was not, so in control, and the father was davening, and the other kid kept his kid always quiet. Shut his kid up. Shut up. Hit him, told him, kept the kid quiet. But the guy himself was always talking in shul. The kids grow up, and the father of the shusher, this kid's not interested in shul. He's just running around and he's doing his thing. And the other one, the davener, his kid, who he didn't really control as much, is davening. So the shusher says to the davener, he says, well, what happened here? I don't understand. You weren't really telling your kid what to do. He said, you don't understand something. There are 2 different lessons. The lesson that I taught my kid was, listen, you're young now, it's hard for you to control yourself. When you get older, you could be a davener like me. You could daven. The lesson you taught your kid was, right now, when you're young, you get shut up. But when you're older and you can shut other people up, you can do what you want to do, then you could talk. He told them the exact opposite lessons. They each modeled lessons that were completely opposite, and all of the talking about the thing that I expect from you means nothing if you're not modeling. It really means nothing. It's bizarre. But really, if you're giving the kids one lesson in the house, you should have emunah b'tochen Hashem. Trust God. And what are you freaking out? What are you freaking out for? So the greatest lesson you teach your kid of trusting God is when they see you like taking it easy. If they see you freaking out, you could scream at your kid all you want, don't freak out. But it is meaningless, because the reality is that if you're freaking out, your kid knows that when I get in a stress situation, I freak out. That's what they're going to do. There's no way around it. So you got to realize it right now. That's 100%. I'm clear on that. If you want to teach your kids something, they're learning, they're modeling from day one. They model, and so the most important thing is not as much what you tell your kid is what you do. Okay, parents shouldn't fight in front of kids. You got a disagreement, don't do it in front of your kids. You never do that. Okay, you never fight in front of your kids. You should make sure that you know. I mean, look, it's impossible to go into be a situation where you act great in front of your kids and you don't when your kids aren't around. That's not possible. So the problem is you have to work on as much as you're going to do. But you got to think whatever message you want your kids to understand in life, that is what you got to have in the house. If you have that in the house, then they will pick that up. They'll have the nurture to get there, but they will pick that up. Yeah.
I'm not saying you like at all should fight in front of your kids, but to have like a disagreement, I think is not such a bad thing, because you are modeling that even though you love each other, that it's okay to disagree and that you've come to a solution and that you've worked to get there. Like,
Right.
I know people whose parents never ever fought in front of them, and they have this massive illusion in their head that marriage should never have a fight.
Right.
And when this person and their significant other had a fight like a year and a half into their relationship, it freaked them out so badly.
Right.
So badly, they were like, I think we might need a break. And it's like, this is normal. It's,
Right.
it's okay
Right.
to have a fight. It's okay to have a disagreement. I'm not saying, I mean, you can't, in a marriage, anyway, you shouldn't fight dirty. I mean, like, it's okay to have a disagreement. But I'm not saying you should fight all the time, but to have a disagreement for your kids to see that it's not necessarily such a bad
That's right. That's right. But you see, we're agreeing. You're saying model to your kids how you disagree.
Yeah.
You can model to your kids how you disagree. That's fine.
It's also important for them to see how you can resolve.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And all, you know, not to
Not
say
that-
negative things to the child, you know, when they grow up about the other person, you know, keep it all positive and.
And also like the important thing that the kids see affection, physical affection also. You know, people who think they're being, you know, super religious and they're not showing affection for the kids are making a mistake.
Not to say you should make out in the kitchen.
No. Yes. It's nice as a kid to know that your parents like each other. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And our kids are they're very clear about that. They're like, oh, cute. And my
Yeah.
girls are like, they're cute.
One night we said, you know, we're going on, and then the kids were, you know, I think it was Yaakov, who's, you know, the youngest of course, and he said, oh, so we're going out to Fuego Monday? I said, and we were like, no, we're going out to Fuego Monday. And then the girls kind of went like, aww. And then he kind of was like, oh,
Oh.
that's how I'm supposed to react. Oh, okay. Oh, that's really nice. It was funny. They were modeling.
Great, very good. So good. So we're hitting some introductory points, and next week we're going to go into some specifics of some of how to talk specifically. But the one principle also. So we have modeling. Modeling is a thing now. So but you gotta tell your kids something. I mean, you gotta. How do you relate to them? You can't just like be behind a glass mirror, a glass window, and like be modeling for them all day. You have to tell them what to do. So the first, or direct them, or guide them, or encourage them, or whatever the term we're going to use. So one thing we have to understand is what is a very famous verse in Mishle and Proverbs. It says, "Chanach l'nar pidarko." You got to train the kid according to their way. Okay, this is very, very important. This is very basics, but this is really important. You understand? Meaning, this ties to what we said before also, age appropriate. That's true. Every kid is different. Developmentally, they're going through different things. Okay? And you got to figure out the nature of the kid. The way the Vilna Gaon discusses it is, for example, the Gemara says that someone who's born under the constellation of Mars is going to be a bloodthirsty kind of person. He's going to be a spiller of blood. But it says,
Gemara says that?
yeah. So, but there's a few options. He could be a mohel. He could be a doctor. He could be a butcher. He could be a thief and a murderer. So that means that you got to understand something. That there are predispositions that people have. And therefore, there's a question of what kind of gain you get to try to change the kid's predisposition. Very often you get not only gain nothing, but it's going to backfire. Okay? So meaning, if the kid, is this kid who likes to dissect frogs, and he likes that stuff, don't say, no, we don't do that. Because that's a mistake. Find a way to direct the kid in a healthy way. That kid may become a great doctor. Okay? So Chinuch Class Pidarko, train a kid according to their ways, that you have to have the wisdom to understand as you see a kid developing. And by the way, you see this in day one. Day one. I mean, as you'll see when you have one kid, I mean, we really realize certain kids that from the time they were little, one of our kids was fiercely independent. Fiercely independent. Like, we couldn't, she didn't want us to change her diaper. She's like, I'll do it myself. Baby, you're 6 months old. You're not doing this yourself. No. And then we had one kid that was so cuddly. All he wanted to do was cuddle. Very, very different people from the very beginning. So you have to figure out what is the child's tendency, what's the child's nature, and play to their strengths. So what the pasuk says in Mishlei is if you train the kid according to their way, when they get older, it'll stay with them. But if you train them according to your way, that's not their way, what's going to happen is you might get them to do this right now, and they might stop, doing certain things, but it's going to backfire. Later they're going to want to do it, and then they're going to be all, confused about what are their values. So it's Chinuch Class Pidarko. You got to figure out each kid is different. What does the kid need, and what's their way? And again, this doesn't mean that we're passive parents. It doesn't mean that we're not telling and directing and guiding our kids what to do. But we're doing it according to what their needs are, not according to what our expectations are. Of course, within the certain parameters. It doesn't mean, if your kid, wants to be a boxer, you don't allow them to go punch other kids in the face, But you find an expression for something that's a healthful expression. Then the kid feels good about themselves. And this gets to a little bit to the issue of discipline. I'm going to see this more next week. We'll talk about it in detail. But let's get straight. What do you guys think about hitting kids? Never, sometimes,
No,
yes, maybe.
I think a patch on the tush or on the hand, not to hurt them, but to make a point. I do think that there's a point to it. You can't abuse it. You can't do it all the time. But if there's a really, I've tried to explain this before to other people, because parents are like, no. There's a movie where there's, it's called Kingdom of Heaven. There's a point where basically the older father is passing on, he's on his dying deathbed, and his adult son is there, and he's about ready to knight him and basically pass on his entire legacy. And he recites this whole thing, and then he patches him on the face, basically. He smacks him on the face, just on the cheek, and he goes, and that is so you never forget it. And I think that's the point. It's not to, God forbid, to hurt them. It should never be done out of aggression, I don't think. But I do think that there's a time and a place for it, and you may never use it on your kid. You may never, but there might be a time and a place where that one moment that it would make a significant point.
So you're saying it's not a style of parenting. It's something that happens on a non-recurring basis. Something that may come up sometimes.
I mean, that's something called, is that anchoring? Have you heard of that term? Anchoring is when you like associate a certain idea or event with something else that causes you to remember it. So like if you're trying to like remember to say make a point in a presentation, you like, when you pick up your pen, that's when you make it. You associate one idea with something else, and you can teach your kid an anchor, like here's something I want to teach you that is something that I don't want you to forget, that is perhaps not what you're suggesting. I'm not saying it's not appropriate, I'm just saying that it may be able to be done using a different technique.
I know growing up, my father was very, very sweet with everything. Once or twice in my life, there was a potch, and I'll tell you, it stood out. It was very like,
Right.
it freaked me out, not that it hurt or that it was anything like that. It freaked me out because it was like, whoa, this is like really serious. Like it's so unusual that it's like,
Right.
that's what freaked me out. It was not that the potch hurt, but what freaked me out was just the fact that like this must be like really
Something.
really
That's the
something.
line.
The kids
So it
have
had a
to
positive
older
effect. It had a
to make
positive
sense of
effect for you,
that,
I think.
I think-
So it was a positive effect then.
Yeah.
I mean, so I had the opposite. I mean, I want to go on record saying like I have no issue with people. This is not a judgmental. But for me, I mean, I did also have those experiences, and now my recollection is like fear and pain, and I don't remember what I was in trouble for.
Right.
And I feel like, for me, like if one of the things I want to teach my child is that we don't hit, then I don't want to hit.
Right. Right.
It's interesting because for me it was the one. I had a little sister. We fight, whatever, beat her up, But one time I crossed the line. And I really hurt her, and that was the potch. It was like there's fighting, there's wrestling, there's playing.
Yeah.
At a certain point, there's a certain thing that is just not okay, and that very much stood out. And
Sure.
it made me realize that that's not, there's a line that you cross. And it's not just any line, it's like this is absolutely 100% cannot happen.
Right. I mean, reinforcing what
Yeah,
you
that's
guys
what
both
I'm
said,
saying.
it
Yeah.
might have been overused.
Yeah, and that really
But that's why I don't wanna.
Right. No, but I think this is a very important point. And I'll tell you, I mean, the way we kind of, when we raised our kids, we thought potching in certain situations was appropriate. I honestly now I kind of think I have some regret about using it. It's a very, very strong medicine. If you're going to use it, you should really use it in very, very, very reserved cases. Very reserved cases, because it's very strong medicine.
Yeah.
It's going to get, so, and of course, I applied the whole thing of never from anger and this and that, but I Ravolba, and I was really surprised. I mean, I knew he had this sheet years ago. Ravolba is against potching, which I always thought was strange, because the verse in Mishlei says that you can potch, right? It says chosa shifta sonus beno. If you save the rod, you hate the child. So the verse seems to say that there is a place to potch. Now he wants to claim that that's the rod there doesn't have to mean hitting. It has to mean it means figuratively in the sense of a strong direction. It's like even positive reinforcement of I'll give you this, if you do that, that's called a rod. So he really talks about, he's very, very, Revolba, is seemingly taking against potching, but I think that we all agree that it is a very, very strong medicine that you really, if you're gonna use it, it's gotta be very, very, very infrequently, closer to not using it than using it. Because the issue of overuse of it, and it's hard to know. It's really hard to know what is called overuse, you know? The parent says, listen, I had to teach the kid. And the thing is, the problem is that it works. It works till a point.
Yeah.
It works till a
Especially
point.
as they get older.
As
Like,
it-
hitting a
right.
teenager is probably a bad idea on a regular basis.
Hitting a teenager is forbidden from the Torah, by the way.
There's
It's against the 613 commandments. You're not allowed to hit a kid. Once a kid turns 14 or so, you can't. It's forbidden to hit them, because what happens is that they may hit you back.
Yep.
And what happens is, in the psychology of hitting the kid, what happens is, so when you hit the kid, there's a certain place where, okay, now there is, and this is where sometimes it's confusing because it works, but then it comes back to bite you later. So you hit the kid. The kid learned the lesson right now, I can't do this. But the kid is now fostering this negativity. And so the kid might listen right now, but it could be that, you know, as time goes on, I mean, Revolt brings a story about this big rabbi who brought his kid to Revolt to help him. And what happened was that the father didn't understand what happened. He always trained the kid, learn Torah, do this, do that, do that, do that. And Revolba said, yeah, because you hit him, you were harsh on him. He did it, and now it's been building up. And now he's turning around. Now he's 15 years old, and now he can't stand you because it's built up inside of him.
There's a book that I've read called, I mean, it's a little unusual to think about the connection here, but it kind of piggybacks off of your idea from earlier. It's called Well Done. It's a book, it's a leadership management type book. And one of the stories that they teach is how they train whales at SeaWorld. And they basically, there's like no negative attention. All they do is focus on positive actions. So they say they basically catch you doing something good and they reward the good action. And as long as they're not, you know, putting their hand on a stove and,
Right.
you know, being dangerous, they basically more or less ignore the negative behavior. And then the kid is usually doing it because they're trying to get some attention. And if you don't acknowledge it, then they quit doing it. And they naturally will gravitate to the thing that they've gotten praise for,
Right.
because you're praising the positive activity.
Right. I think there's truth to it. I think that's on the whole good. I think there will be a place for sometimes for negative
Certainly.
statements to the kid, but negative consequences. But that's what we're going to see next time. Like how do you do that? And how do you avoid the idea of, you know, because you know, I'll give you an example. We know that Avraham made a mistake with his education of Yishmael. Avraham was the great love. He loved everyone, and he wasn't tough with Yishmael when he had to be tough with him. So for people there needs to be, there always is the plus, the positive, the minus, the right and the left hand. And I think there's a place to use the left hand of the negative, but it's got to be done with extreme care. And I'm not saying the person can't hit. The Shlomo Volba was against it, especially in our time. I see the wisdom of it. I think about myself in terms of, because certainly as a young parent, I said, okay, there's certain situations, like some kid, like I stopped hitting or potching, better word, potching my kids that were born later. Kids that were born earlier, when I was a younger parent, I was more like, okay, this is the time that you get a potch. That line for me has gone very, very much the other way, because I think as I maybe gotten a little smarter, it's a very, very strong medicine. That goes for not just hitting, that goes for yelling, that goes for threats. we're gonna need to, and this is where the hardest part of parenting practically is, we're gonna need to understand, how do I get the kid to do what they should do and not act in inappropriate behaviors? When we're not like, this is not 1969 where, okay, just do whatever you wanna do. So you gotta direct the kid. But how do we do it in a way that's successful? That's what we're gonna see next time. We're gonna talk about practically what do we do to go and to discourage negative behaviors, encourage positive behaviors, but not in a way that's going to carry with it the very, very negative consequences that overuse or misuse of hitting, threatening, punishing will really carry with. They will carry those consequences. And if it's once, in Effie's case, and it's good, okay. If it's twice. But what's the line where it's going to be already, it builds up in the kid? And by the way, which kid? Which kid? There are kids that if you punch them 10 times, you punch them, it doesn't faze them. They're like, and then when they get older, they're good. But you got a kid who's going to store that up, and you're going to be like, what? You punched me when I was 4 years old. Yeah. You have to know the kid also, and so it's a very powerful medicine. And we're gonna talk about the alternatives of how to use that to direct the kid in both positive and negative reinforcement. All right.